there's some realities out there that the banks have to deal with. So with interest rates, for example, we have to raise money offshore to keep funding the Australian economy, which is in the interests of everyone. That money is expensive and the price of it is volatile. So those are pricing realities that the banks have to deal with. Now, part of my challenge will be to be out there explaining loudly and as often as I can to the community what is behind those decisions.
There are others explaining, putting a counter-argument. The Australia Institute, for instance, has just released a report last week saying that the Big Four earned a total of $35 billion last year in underlying profits. It described them as profit gougers who've taken advantage of their increased dominance in the lending market.
Well, look, I haven't looked at the report. I was fortunate enough last week to be on holidays enjoying some downtime before I took on this role yesterday. But it sounds to me like, that's very emotive language. I'm not sure what the substance is for those claims. Australia's banks are profitable. I actually think that's a good thing. That underpins a strong economy, and a strong economy is in the interests of all Australians.
Australian banks are profitable, and just to keep on this notion of the banks, the major banks consolidating during the global financial crisis, it's there for everyone to see. Used to be alternate lenders. They're not there anymore. They've just disappeared, leaving the major banks there in its wake. It's hard to argue against the banks having consolidated during the global financial crisis when everyone else has struggled.
Well, look, undoubtedly there is less choice than there was before the crisis, but I don't think that equates to no competition. I actually think there's some very strong evidence out there that all of the banks are competing very fiercely for customers. We're seeing
It's just a smaller pool of banks and therefore a larger pool of customers for them all.
Well, I'm not sure what the problem is there, provided those banks are actually competing with each other, and I think there's clear evidence that they are competing with each other. We're seeing a lot of competition at the moment for deposits, for example. So Australian savers are actually benefiting greatly from that competition. We've also seen in the last 12 months the banks slash a whole pile of unpopular fees to customers. Now, there's only one possible reason they would have done that, and that is because they are actually keenly competing for their customers' business.
It's 4 minutes to 8 on RM Breakfast. Our guest this morning is Stephen Munchenberg, who's just taken over this week the job as Chief Executive of the Australian Bankers Association. Stephen, aside from the bank's reputation and the difficulties they might have on that front, the other problem for our banks is the wave of new regulations heading their way this year, it seems like proposed new liquidity rules. Regulators say that increasing banks' capital buffer will make the global financial system much safer, much sturdier. Yet many of your members are clearly worried about this. Why are they worried about it?
Well, look, we are worried. One of the clear reasons why Australia did so well through the global financial crisis is the strength of our regulatory system here. And the last thing we want is to actually weaken our banking sector by imposing solutions to overseas problems, solutions to problems that the Australian banking sector never had. Now, having said that, we need to make sure that Australia's banking regulation remains consistent globally, so there's a real tension there. But one of the things I will be focusing on is making sure that we don't bring into Australia regulation that actually weakens our banking sector.
Yeah, it seems as though you're fighting an uphill battle. The chairman of the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, or APRA, John Laker, said this week that Australian banks are going to have to fall in line with global standards. He in fact said any self-congratulatory tone here from our banks needs to be curbed. After all, many hands were involved in the lifting. So it's not good enough to argue that we came through it well enough. He said this is a global problem. There were global responses that helped with all this, including government backing.
Well, and I absolutely agree with Dr. Laker that many hands were responsible for the success that Australia had by avoiding the worst of the global financial crisis. But I'm sure that Dr. Laker is also out there internationally making sure that whatever new regime is put in place is suitable to Australia's circumstances.
Do our banks have a problem, though, with if there is a demand for increased liquidity buffers of high-quality assets? Is that a problem?
Well, there will be a problem. A lot of this, Fran, is going to depend on how these things are actually put into place at the end of the day. At the moment we're having a lot of discussions. Undoubtedly, there will be new and increased regulatory requirements coming out of the global response to the financial crisis. What we need to be careful of is that they don't impose unnecessary costs on the Australian banking sector, and we don't want to be in a situation where that becomes a cost to the whole economy.
So not impose unnecessary costs, but you accept that some costs might be fair cop?
There are going to be changes. There's no doubt about that. The issue for us really is to make sure that whatever those changes are, we need to learn the lessons from the global financial crisis. But whatever those changes are, we need to make sure that they are also suitable to our domestic situation.
Well, meanwhile, this is day 2 for you in the job. What do you see as your key challenge as the spokesperson now for the banks?
Well, really, you've touched on the two main things I actually do see, Fran, so thank you for that. Undoubtedly, the banking industry does have reputational challenges, and the ABA will be playing its part in going out there and trying to respond and address those. And secondly, the regulatory response to the global financial crisis is a very real issue that we have to deal with. It is going to be very hard striking that balance between international regulation making and Australia's needs. So there's a couple of good challenges for us.
Stephen Munchenberg, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And good luck with that job. He's the new Chief Executive of the Australian Bankers Association.